In 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The men were 21 and 18 when they admitted to killing their parents at their home in Beverly Hills in 1989. Defense attorneys argued they had been sexually abused by their father for years and they feared for their lives. In a recent development, prosecutors announced that they will recommend the brothers be resentenced to 50 years to life. And because they were under 26 years old at the time of the crimes, they would be eligible for parole immediately. A hearing could come within the next month. Joining me this morning to discuss this is our 9 News legal expert, Whitney Traylor. Thanks for coming in.
Sure. Crazy, interesting case.
It is a crazy case. So the case really garnered a lot of attention after several of those documentaries came out. Do you think this played into the ruling?
Yes, I do think this played into at least the decision to go forward with the attempt to resentence, because the prosecution's office was getting hundreds of calls from people wanting this release. So that was a major part of it. And then I think the second part was back in May, May of last year, Eric Menendez, they filed a habeas corpus because they said there was new evidence that came forward. So this is all kind of coming together at the same time. So it makes sense now that the prosecutor would move to do the resentencing.
It really is fascinating. So they've already served 30 years in prison.
Yeah.
They, again, were not supposed to get out, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Talk about what this resentencing would mean, though.
Yeah, this resentencing would be significant. And there's some people who are frustrated saying, hey, this is more of an example of privilege or whatever, because what they would do then is the resentencing would be 50 years to life, which would give them the eligibility for parole. And because they went in at the young age, under 26, there was a California law that was passed in 2018 that allows those folks to be eligible for parole. So they would be eligible right now. Now, would they get out? There's still other procedures that have to happen, but that's why this is significant, is because now they went from not being eligible for parole to possibly being eligible right now.
So what's interesting, if someone hasn't seen the documentaries, they may not know this, but when this case went to trial in the 90s, there were actually 2 trials, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So in the first trial, they went together, they had separate juries, and they came back, they were a hung jury, because in that trial, it was between murder and manslaughter, and they couldn't decide. So it was a hung jury. But in that case, they were able to really assert the defense of sexual abuse. Well, in the second trial, the judge disallowed a lot of that evidence. So it was really, their self-defense argument was hard to make without the sexual abuse allegations and testimony or whatever. And so then they were found guilty on all 3 counts, both of them, and they were sentenced to this life without possibility of parole.
And that's really what came out recently. It was like a letter or some type of diary entry or something that happened during this time.
Exactly.
Alleging the assaults, right?
Well, and that's what led to the habeas corpus, was this notion of new evidence. And the new evidence was exactly that. Eric Menendez had apparently written a letter to his uncle at the time this was all happening, saying, hey, we were being sexually abused. That was never introduced, so that's new evidence. And one of the band members from Menudo, the Puerto Rican band, he came out and signed an affidavit saying that the father, Jose Menendez, had sexually assaulted him, had drugged him and raped him at the same time. So those 2 pieces of evidence are significant. And then they're also, the prosecutors also arguing, well, they've had good behavior, they've done all these things while they were behind bars, they started programs, things like that, they got advanced degrees. So there's all these factors that are mitigating that would support them getting out.
So what happens now? Like, what's the timeline?
So now I think there's a status hearing on November 26th, and then there's going to be a resentencing hearing, and that's where the judge will hear testimony. Now, the prosecutor, he's, I guess, embattled right now, and he's coming up on a tough election, so some people say it was politically motivated.
Interesting.
Well, it sounds like he's going to let some people from his office actually testify against him and say why they disagree with this decision. There's also family members who, it seems like the majority of family members support them getting out, but there's some who are very vocal who don't want them to get out. So the judge will weigh all that. If the judge agrees, then it'll go to the parole board. The parole board will have to decide, and then Gavin Newsom will ultimately have to sign off on it. So there's a lot of steps left.
There are,
yeah.
But this is huge. I mean, so many people have been fascinated by this case, so I'm sure you'll be following it, and we'll probably talk about it again in the future.
All right, I'll be back.
As always, Whitney, thank you so much.
Yep,
Chris?
good to be here.